also wanted to table, we talked about having a committee that's focused for sub trades, and I'd like to move that forward as well. Sub trades is it's a big statement. I mean, there's lots of different disciplines in there, but if we could get a group going that was specifically for skilled trades, and then as that group grew and we had good robust participation there and a demand for additional focus, we might break up that group into more discipline focus. So you might eventually have a mechanical trade committee and a structural trade committee. But maybe initially, just to get it going, we should have a trade committee and try to invite key individuals that we know in the industry that are members that want to participate in the group. What do you think about that, Dan? I mean, you and I collectively know a lot of individuals out there that we can probably call upon.
Definitely, I do believe that a trade committee is an important part because we're busy, and in fact what the general contractors will do is that we will supply it to our trades that we use to get comments back. I mean, we're producing these documents. It's not just us. I mean, we need to make sure that everybody's on board with what we're going to produce, and so I think that's very important, and it's easier if there's a separate committee that will deal with that. Just on another committee that I had thought of, and that is the legal side. We have Paul Staccato that is part of our group, and certainly the legal end of BIM is an important thing that we need to look at. So there's another committee. There's thousands of them out there actually that you could think of, new technologies or emerging technologies. These are all great little things, but we are a small group, so we have to be manageable too, and we have to be realistic. So it can go on and on.
I think taking granted we could have numerous committees that are put together. I think what would be interesting in all this is identifying, just as we've done, these areas in such a way that we almost create a general checklist of how these interact. That at the end of the day, it's almost like we've done an internal validation for it. So, for example, Paul Stocco from Brownlee, who is on the board, he could probably float in the same way, amongst them all, and becomes a bit of a clearinghouse to say, yes, you should be looking at these issues, the following. Because I think that we always run the risk of, if we create committees, you're inviting silos. And what we're doing is creating a cylinder of excellence, basically, that everybody is in. So I think it's worthy of fleshing these out, and that's why I think one of the things we wanted to discuss today and get input from yourselves is, we've all been part of councils and groups and agencies that have gone fairly traditional, but how should we structure? What are ideas that you have? You've heard from some of the board members, but how do you think? What's the roadmap that you see for CanBIM in the weeks, months, and years ahead, given that this is a journey of discovery? In many ways, I think we're all on the deck of the Santa Maria, with a general idea that the world isn't flat and we're going to drop off the other end, but we're all willing to take that chance. So I'd like to get that sense, I think, from our members. How do you see us moving ahead with these issues? Dave, I'm going to put you on the spot. Yeah.
Hi, I'm David McCarricker, a principal with the Mitchell Partnership in Toronto. The way I'd like to see CanBIM move is through the development and the adoption of these guidelines and standards, so that when we go into projects from the outset, we have a set of rules, guidelines, that a playbook, let's call it that we can all sort of refer back to, if not as hard and fast rules that everybody has to follow, at least some sort of a best practice reference guide, so that when we get to issues of clash detection, we all know who's responsible to resolve those issues. And I could go into a litany of examples, but clash detection during design is pretty straightforward. Whoever the prime consultant would be be that person responsible for identifying the clash and directing the different design disciplines how that clash is to be resolved. That process becomes a bit murky as you sort of slide from design into construction, and this is really where I'd like to see a finer point put on some of those rules or guidelines as to how clashes are resolved in the field before it becomes an issue. In the presentation I'll go through later on, I'll show you some of the things that we came up with at Human Rights. And really, you talk about, you know, us being on the deck of the Santa Maria. I think in some ways we actually sailed off the edge of the world. And the finger pointing and you know, the accusations that arose out of that, I really don't want to ever have to repeat again. So that's really where I see CanBIM stepping in, so that we have this document or this set of guidelines that we can all go back to as, you know, as the recipe for how we resolve these things going forward. That's my comment.
Thanks, Dave.
I think that's very similar to some of the challenges that we've had. You know, like when we're dealing with multiple projects around the country, and we're seeing different owners that are aware of BIM and the benefits to the project, and they want to see the systems and technologies used throughout the entire project. And it's a very a difficult thing to ask for. Period, because there's not a lot of common standards that you see in the industry that says these are the steps that we expect you to take, and then you can, you know, obviously it's a guideline, you can have a variable of that. And then we're also seeing clients ask for end deliverables, but the end deliverables are not well spec'd. I mean, it's essentially like, we want a BIM, and that's as much as saying I want a building, right? That's as much information as you're receiving, because it can be very complex around how you structure data and whatnot. So I mean, I agree, definitely there should be a common standard or a procedure, playbook, guideline, best practices document, and I think that CanBIM probably take the protocol that you've been working on, I think would probably fill that need nicely. I think that an end deliverable spec as well for a model with a common sort of data structure specified would be useful to the industry as well, so that when a client says we want a model for facilities management, we want that model to represent the as-built conditions, we want it to dovetail and play nice with our system, so that we can pull data out in a COBie format and inject it into our FM system, or whatever the case is that there's a common approach there and a common document. And that would help us as a general contractor when we go to bid on work and we see requirements, to evaluate those requirements from a time perspective and say, okay, we have to allocate X amount of resources to make sure we can manage that deliverable, or we're going to put our team that has this skill set to manage this 3D coordination process, or whatever the case is. So I don't think it's something that it just happens. I think it's a big push, but you know, as a board, maybe we could direct and sort of champion the development of these all the parts of these documents, so that the sum of the parts is an overall document that the industry can refer to.
Yeah, I like Dave's playbook, you know, because you think of a team, and that's really what we all are in this room. We're all various facets of a process that works together to give a client at the end of the day a product. So I think the idea of a playbook, you know, I was thinking as Dave was making the comments in yours, Tom, that NBIMs and ISO standards are all about the why and the what. And they're great documents, but very, very few actually talk about the how and the when. And I think that's getting to the point that Dave's bringing up, is there's all this great stuff, but the how and the when is critical to us. So the idea of, you know, developing standards and protocols around best practice, the idea of a playbook of a how and a when, is building on those things and then saying this is how we think it should be done and when it should be done and the consequences, so that there's no finger pointing, it's just seamless. So I think that's something that we should take forward and move with.